Welcome to the Energy Show. I'm journalist Markham Hislop, and today I'm joined by political scientist Duane Bratt, and we're going to be talking about a press conference that was held today between Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and Ontario Premier Doug Ford about pipelines to Ontario and, well, some other stuff. So welcome to the interview, Duane.
Happy to be here, Markham.
Well, isn't this a fun? I tell you, if you wanted a cherry on the sundae of the Calgary Stampede, this was it. And maybe I'll turn it over to you and say, give us an overview of that press conference this morning.
Well, it was more than just a press conference. So the first Monday of Stampede Week is the Premier's breakfast. And usually you've got the entire caucus of the governing party there at McDougall Center, which is the headquarters for the government in Calgary. And they flip hamburgers and there's some entertainment, and the Premier gives a bit of a speech, and there's lots of lobbyists and media and members of the public, right? But every once in a while you get special guests. So today we had Premier Scott Moe and Premier Doug Ford of Ontario flipping pancakes with Danielle Smith. And then they walked back into the McDougall Center and had a big signing ceremony for this memorandum of understanding. So there's a number of things at play here. Let's just start off with the relationship between Ontario and Alberta. There was a very close relationship between Kenney and Ford. They were seen as part of the resistance against Justin Trudeau. They launched a lawsuit over the carbon tax. They even joked about finishing each other's sentences. Ford even showed up to the Stampede breakfast and flipped pancakes with Kenney. Then during the election campaign, things got really cold between Alberta and Ontario. There were disagreements over how to deal with Donald Trump. And there was a feeling that Ford did not support Pierre Poilievre enough, that him and Corey Tenenk were too critical of Poilievre. You had conservatives in Alberta going, well, Doug Ford, he's not really a conservative. He's never been a conservative. He's really a liberal, and he wants Mark Carney to win. And oh my God, he says nice things about Chrystia Freeland. And now it looks like they're all back together again. So this is a return to the past. There's a lot of common ground, but for very different reasons. Very different reasons. And I will say this.
Well, look, what they committed to, and in the press conference and in the press release that the Alberta government issued, there were comments from both Smith and from Ford, and both of them talked about building pipelines
Yes.
for Alberta. And then Rob Anderson, who's executive director of Smith's office, tweeted out that that meant a bitumen pipeline to southern Ontario. So what does that mean in political
Well,
terms?
not just pipelines. They want the repeal of all of these energy policies. Basically, what Smith got out of this is Doug Ford, in writing, agreeing with all of Smith's demands. But as I said, for very different reasons. When you listen to Ford, and especially when you read his blurb in the press release, it was all about the threat of Donald Trump and how we need to have a more national economy, including pipelines. He talked about the risk of Line 5, which funds the Sarnia refinery, but goes through parts of Michigan that Gretchen Whitmer wants to stop, the governor of Michigan. So his concern is all about Trump. But when you listen to Smith, she doesn't mention Trump at all. And to her, it's just a continuation of the fight that she had with Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney. So while they're on common ground, they're coming at it from two very different perspectives. And I think this is a big win for Smith to get Ford as an ally
Well,
on her traditional demands.
speaking of wins for Smith, I have to bring up this interview that Chris Varco of the Calgary Herald did with Prime Minister Mark Carney on Sunday, because, and I'll read it out for you. So he was asked, Varco asked Carney if a new oil pipeline to the British Columbia coast would be included in his government's list of projects deemed to be of national importance. Quote, I would think, given the scale of the economic opportunity, the resources we have, the expertise we have, that is highly, highly likely that we will have an oil pipeline that is a proposal for one of these projects of national interest, end quote. I mean, you want to talk about a boost for the premier,
Yeah.
that combined with the press conference.
So Smith has been fighting Carney over this for a long period of time. And she's had a list of demands. She is aiding and abetting a separatist movement and saying to Carney, you have to do this or the separatists are going to gain power. Um, but I've also said she's pushing against an open door, that Carney is very receptive to this idea because of the threat posed by the United States. The problem with it is there's no proponent and there's no root. Now, Smith says, well, you have to make all of these legislative changes before any proponent will come forward. What she ignores, and again ignores today, and what Doug Ford ignored, is Bill C-5 supersedes all of that other legislation. That if it's viewed in the national interest, then the tanker ban and the emissions cap and the clean fuel standards, none of that's relevant anymore. But that's not what Smith wants. She wants a pipeline and an actual repeal of all of these bills or all of these laws, even though those aren't necessary to getting it built. Carney says, who's going to build this pipeline and where's it going to go? Because sometimes Smith talks about it going to Prince Rupert, even though the old Northern Gateway proposal said Prince Rupert isn't very good, it's Kitimat. Well, if I'm sitting in Calgary, which I am, Kitimat, Prince Rupert, what does it matter? Well, there's 200 kilometers between them. Like, that's a big deal. And now she's phrased it as Northwest BC, like getting more vague. Well, when you go to the submission of projects, you better have more than just, yeah, let's have a pipeline to Northwest BC. Who's going to build it? Who's going to operate it? And what's the route design? That's where the rubber hits the road. And Smith is going, well, no one's going to go forward unless you get rid of all of this stuff. And Carney's going, I can't get rid of all of this stuff, and I can't even consider it unless we have a proponent and a route. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing going on. But I think at the end of the day, by fall, someone will come forward.
What do you make of Smith's strategy here? Because we followed this over the last X number of months, and it started out we want to revive Northern Gateway, and then it became a
Yeah.
million-barrel pipeline to Prince Rupert, and then it became maybe a pipeline to Churchill, and now we've got a pipeline out to Southern Ontario, and repeal all of this legislation that she and the industry don't like. She just keeps piling demands and demands and demands on top of Carney, and Carney seems to be getting warmer and friendlier in public to the idea of pipelines.
Each of those three projects, pipeline projects, are very different. Right. So the Northwest BC one, I think, is the simplest. It only involves two provinces. It's going to Asia. That makes sense. The other three, the one to Churchill, that was been greatly supported by Wab Kinew, the premier of Manitoba. The Western premiers agree with that. I think that is the idea of getting it to Europe instead of crossing the country, going part way and then going up through the Arctic. And then they used to throw Energi East in there. And now they're reframing Energi East to it ending in Ontario, meaning you don't need the support of Quebec because it ends in Ontario. There, you're going to have support right across the route, right? Alberta's going to support it. Saskatchewan's going to support it. Manitoba's going to support it. Ontario's going to support it. But the reason and the rationale has completely changed. It's not about the export market. It's about a fear around Line 5. As I said earlier, Gretchen Whitmore has tried to block it over water issues in the Great Lakes. She doesn't have the jurisdiction to do that, but the president of the United States might. And so far, Trump hasn't said boo about this, but all it's going to take is a whisper in his ear, and all of a sudden, Line 5 is the most important piece of leverage he's ever seen. And that would be, and Ford has talked about that would be devastating to Ontario if they shut that down, even for a couple days. And so this would be going a Trans-Canada route, ignoring the U.S. part for the Ontario market, not for Europe.
Well, there are a lot of technical issues here and economic issues that have not yet to be discussed because we're talking about, things in principle, and these are hypothetical examples or
Yeah.
proposals. But it's the politics of this that I find fascinating because Smith is emerging as this, oh, has for a while, but it seems like she's getting more and more gravitas, more and more support. But she's emerged as this national voice for the energy industry, and we don't listen to anybody else. It's Danielle Smith dominates.
Yeah. So her position has not changed since the fall of 2024, since the election of Trump. So when she said the best way to deal with Trump is to build pipelines, well, she was supporting that when she was premier, before she became premier. She's consistent with both Kenny and, for that matter, Rachel Notley on those issues. Getting rid of all of that federal legislation, again, has been consistent with previous governments. What has changed is the political environment in Canada as a result of the election of Donald Trump. And so Smith is doing multiple things here. She is trying to play good cop with the United States, but she's also building a coalition across the country to present to Mark Carney. And she's also supporting footsies, at least, the separatists in Alberta with the threat. So she is offering carrots. Look at, I've got the support of Ford, the largest, most populous province in the country that probably has a better relationship with Mark Carney. She has worked on public opinion. And then she has also got, and if you don't like this, look at these crazies over here who want to leave. How are you going to deal with that? So she is taking political advantage of this changing environment, and she is playing multiple cards here and building something up. What is missing in this is the BC government, right? Because it's one thing to have an MOU with Ontario. It's another if the most likely scenario is a new project to Northwest BC. Where's BC on this? Because they have opposed any form of bitumen pipeline. They support LNG because that comes from BC, but they don't support this. And in fact, at the big, First Minister's meeting, EB wasn't even there. So that, I think, is a challenge. But based on some of the comments of Mark Carney, I think EB's the one that's looking more isolated now. So there is some real interesting political dimensions going on here.
Well, I want to ask you about that, and we'll wrap up the interview this way, Duane, is that the Trans Mountain Expansion project confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt that the federal government has exclusive jurisdiction over interprovincial pipelines across the border. So if Mark
Yeah,
Carney says that there's going to be a pipeline to Prince Rupert and he's willing to exercise that authority, it will get built, and EB can't stop it. We know that
yeah,
that's legally and constitutionally the case. But the issue here is Carney has this big vision of an east-west economy that's open and free trade, and then
yeah.
exports from the ports from Vancouver and so on. And a fight between Alberta and BC over this pipeline would seem to threaten that consensus and that he needs to make that work. And so, how does he tiptoe
You're
around?
separate. Yeah, you need to separate the legal authority from the political environment. And you see that with Energy East. They keep talking about the Quebec veto. Well, there is no Quebec legal veto, but there is a political veto, as we saw. And in the case of BC, I have made the case, and Trudeau gets no credit for this in the province of Alberta. He lost political capital to put TMX through. Substantial. He did not gain a single vote by doing that. He lost votes by doing that. I am also curious whether we may see a crown corporation, either federally or provincially, building that pipeline to Northwest BC. If no proponent, if Enbridge, TC Energy, they don't step up, do we see a repeat of what we saw in with Trans Mountain, where Kinder Morgan backed away and it got federalized and a crown corp was created? And I could see Smith doing that, creating a provincial crown that hasn't been mentioned, but she's been creating a lot of crown corporations. And I wonder if that is sort of in the back pocket to be able to do. And would she risk Alberta money to do that? And I think she would. Or you might see a joint federal provincial crown corp, because right now I'm not seeing a private entity going forward.
Right. And for instance, the CEO of Enbridge has said very clearly that our requirement to build a pipeline is that all of the regulation that Smith regularly asks to be repealed, all of that has to be repealed. In addition to which, and this comes out of the March 19th letter from the CEOs to the political leaders, all available emergency powers have to be
Yep.
deployed to support that pipeline. And boy, that's a big political ask.
Yeah, and is Bill C5 sufficient to do that by saying, well, no, we will say if it's in the national interest, C5 supersedes everything else. Would that be enough for Enbridge? I don't know. Or do they want even more certainty? Like, are they going to say, do we have to go through any environmental standards? Will there be any threats in the courts from First Nations or environmental groups? No federal government would be able to say, no, we're just going to toss the Constitution out for the sake of this one project.
Yeah, this is a fascinating story with a lot of angles to it, and we're going to be following this with great detail over the coming months. Duane, thank you very much for this, and I know you're off to the Calgary Stampede. Nice hat, by the way, and thank you very much.
I don't have the fancy belt buckle like Doug Ford did, but maybe that's when I show up tomorrow, I'll get a gift like that.
But do you have cowboy boots?
Oh, I've got cowboy boots. I've got the whole 9 yards.
Well, enjoy your time at the Stampede.
Okay. See you, Marco.